My world didn't end with a bang. It ended with the soft, sickening thud of a suitcase hitting a bedroom floor. My son, the man I had raised, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, was emptying our life savings to run away with his con artist girlfriend, leaving me and my grandson with nothing. I was devastated, my heart shattered into a million pieces. I thought we were ruined. But I was wrong. I had forgotten about my 13-year-old grandson, Leo. He looked up from his laptop, his young face set with a grim determination I'd never seen before, and said 5 words that changed everything. "Grandma, don't worry. I've handled it." And days later, my son called me, his voice no longer arrogant but begging for a help that would never come. Before I tell you how this nightmare unfolded and how my brilliant grandson turned the tables on the 2 people who tried to destroy us, I'd love to know where you're all watching from. It's a little past 4 p.m. here in Austin, Texas on a Tuesday afternoon. Drop your city or country and the time in the comments below. It makes me feel like we're all sitting here together, sharing a cup of coffee. Okay, let's get back to it. It all started on an otherwise ordinary October afternoon. The air had that crisp, early autumn scent, and golden light was filtering through the tall windows of our old Victorian house. I was in the laundry room, folding Leo's soccer uniforms, the familiar scent of fabric softener filling the air. That's when I heard it, the heavy thud from upstairs. It wasn't a normal sound. It was the sound of finality, of decision. At 67, I'd learned to trust the instincts that had served me well for over 40 years as a school teacher. The same internal radar that could spot a cheating student from across a crowded classroom was now screaming a silent, high-pitched alarm. My hands stilled over Leo's neatly pressed jersey. I set it down and made my way to the grand, creaking staircase that was the heart of our home. Each step groaned under my weight, echoing the protest in my soul. Rick's bedroom door was wide open. And there he was, my son, my only child, Richard. He was 40 years old, but in that moment, he looked like a desperate teenager shoving clothes into a black duffel bag with a frantic energy. There was no order, no care. He was grabbing handfuls of shirts from drawers, scooping toiletries off the dresser. It was the movement of someone fleeing a fire. His work laptop sat open on his unmade bed, the screen glowing with multiple browser windows. "Going somewhere?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, though I tried to keep it steady. He didn't look up. "Business trip. Last-minute thing." The lie was so blatant, so disrespectful. It hung in the air between us like thick smoke. Rick worked local tech support for a computer repair company. They didn't do business trips. They barely sent him to their downtown office more than twice a week. He worked mostly from home, from this very room. "For how long?" I pressed, stepping over the threshold. "Not sure yet." He moved to his dresser to grab a dop kit, and in his haste, he knocked over a silver-framed photo. It was my favorite picture of his late wife, Linda, her face radiant as she held a newborn Leo. The frame hit the hardwood floor and the glass shattered, scattering like tiny, sharp tears. He stepped right over it. He didn't even flinch. That was the moment my heart truly broke. That photo had sat in that exact spot for 13 years, since the day we lost Linda in childbirth. Every single night, Rick used to kiss his fingertips and touch her smiling face before he went to bed. It was his ritual, his connection to the woman he'd loved. Now he walked past her shattered image as if it were nothing more than debris on the floor. "Rick, stop," I said, my voice firmer now. "Talk to me. What's really going on?" He finally stopped his frantic packing and looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes chilled me to the bone. There was nothing there. No guilt, no sadness, no love. Just a cold, hard resolve and something that looked terrifyingly like relief. "I'm leaving, Mom," he said, his voice flat. "I should have done this years ago." The words were a physical blow. All those years I'd stepped in to raise his son while he supposedly worked through his grief.
More than a decade of being the mother Leo needed, of packing his lunches, helping with his homework, and attending his parent-teacher conferences, all while Rick slowly disappeared, vanishing into his computer screens and his late-night activities that I had chosen, naively, not to question. A decade of holding our broken family together with my teacher's pension and a grandmother's unconditional love. What about Leo? The question tore from my throat. He's better off with you. He always has been. Rick zipped the duffel bag with a sound of brutal finality. He lifted it from the bed. You've been his real parent since day one. Now it's just official. Just then, my cell phone rang, its cheerful tune a jarring contrast to the tension in the room. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello, is this Helen Miller? A brisk professional voice asked. Yes, this is she. Ma'am, my name is David Chen from the fraud department at Capital Trust Bank. We're calling regarding a credit card recently opened in your name. We're showing some unusual activity and a current balance of over $5,000. My blood ran cold. What? That's impossible. I haven't opened a new credit card in 20 years. Rick's head snapped up. He strode over, snatched the phone from me. This is her son, he barked into the phone. It's a mistake. We've been getting spam calls. Take our number off your list. He ended the call before the man could reply and handed the phone back to me, his face a mask of annoyance. Just telemarketers, Mom. They're relentless, he said, turning back to his bag. But his hand was shaking. I saw it, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor. And when I looked into his eyes again, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones. This was no spam call. This was the opening chapter of a nightmare, and my own son was the author. But what I couldn't possibly know then was just how deep the betrayal went and how the quiet boy downstairs was about to become our only hope for survival. Rick slung the duffel bag over his shoulder. The casual cruelty of his words left me speechless. He started to walk past me, and a primal instinct took over. I grabbed his arm, my fingers digging into his bicep. His touch was cold, impersonal. He said, There is no family, Mom. There's just you and Leo playing house, while I pay the bills. Well, now you can figure out how to pay them yourselves. The threat was clear, a venomous dart aimed right at my heart. What does that mean? I asked, my voice trembling.
But he was already gone, his heavy footsteps thudding down the stairs, the sound of his bag bumping against the wall as he went. I followed, my worn slippers catching on the carpet runner, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I felt a wave of dizziness, and for a moment I had to grip the banister to steady myself. The world seemed to be tilting on its axis. We entered the living room, a room filled with memories. Leo's first steps, Christmases around the fireplace, quiet evenings reading together. And there, at the antique oak desk that had belonged to my own father, sat my grandson, Leo. He was bent over his algebra homework, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was tall for 13, lean and lanky like his father had been at that age, but his thoughtful nature, his quiet intensity, that was all Linda. He looked up as we entered, his intelligent brown eyes taking in the entire scene in an instant, his father's duffel bag, my panicked expression, the palpable tension that filled the room. He didn't look shocked. He didn't look scared. He just looked observant. Going somewhere, Dad? Leo's voice was calm, almost detached. Rick paused at the front door, his hand on the knob. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw his resolve waver as he looked at his son. A flicker of something, guilt, regret, crossed his face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that same cold mask. I need some time away, buddy, he said, the words sounding hollow and rehearsed.
Grandma will take care of you. For how long? Leo asked, the same question I had asked, but his held a different weight. He wasn't pleading, he was gathering information. I don't know yet. Leo just nodded once, a sharp, precise movement, as if he were filing the data away for later analysis. Okay. The simple acceptance in my grandson's voice was what finally shattered me. No tears, no protests, no desperate pleas for his father to stay. Just a quiet, unnerving resignation, as if this was a moment he had been expecting, a variable he had already factored into his own complex equation. He knew. Somehow, on some level, my grandson knew this was coming. Rick opened the front door, and a rush of cool October air swept into our warm house, carrying with it the scent of dying leaves. He said, "I'll call when I'm settled," not looking at either of us. "Where are you going?" I choked out. He finally turned, his silhouette framed against the graying twilight sky. "Somewhere I can breathe again." The door closed behind him with a soft click, a sound that was somehow 1,000 times louder and more violent than if he had slammed it. Through the beveled glass window, I watched him. I watched my son load his duffel bag into his silver Honda, the car I had helped him buy. I watched him get in without a single backward glance. I watched him drive away from the house where he grew up, the house where his own son had lived every single day of his life. He was gone. The silence he left behind was deafening. Mason and I stood motionless in the living room. The only sounds were the steady, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner and the low hum of the furnace kicking on. Outside, a car engine faded into the distance until it was no more. The world kept moving, but ours had just stopped. "Is he coming back?" Leo asked, his voice still quiet, his gaze fixed on the front door. I wanted to lie. Oh, how I wanted to wrap him in my arms and tell him a comforting lie, to shield him from the ugly truth I had seen so clearly in his father's eyes. But Leo was too smart for that. He deserved more than empty platitudes. He deserved the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I knelt down, my old me's protesting, so I could look him in the eye. "I don't think so, sweetheart." He processed this for a moment, then, with careful, deliberate precision, he closed his algebra textbook and stacked it neatly on top of his other books. He turned to me, and his expression was one I had never seen on his young face before. It was an expression of profound seriousness, of an old soul looking out through a child's eyes. "Grandma," he said, and his voice was devoid of any childish waver. It was steady, firm, and utterly confident. "Don't worry, I'll handle this." I almost laughed, a hysterical sound bubbling in my throat. Handle what? He was 13 years old, a child. What could he possibly handle about his father abandoning us? About the mountain of bills I now realized were solely my responsibility, and the gaping wound that had just been torn in our lives. But something in his tone, a deep, resonant certainty, made me pause. This wasn't childish bravado. This wasn't an empty attempt to comfort me. This was a statement of fact. "What do you mean, Leo?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He picked up his neat stack of books and headed for the stairs. He paused on the bottom step and looked at me. "First, I need to check our bank accounts. Then we'll know exactly what we're dealing with." Bank accounts? My 13-year-old grandson, who should be worrying about soccer practice and video games, was talking about bank accounts. "Leo, wait!" I called after him, but he was already climbing the stairs, his footsteps sure and steady, leaving me alone in a house that suddenly felt cavernous and empty, filled with terrifying questions I couldn't answer, and a future I couldn't see. And I had no idea that upstairs, in his small bedroom, my grandson was about to uncover a level of betrayal that would make a simple abandonment feel like a kindness. That first night without Rick was the longest of my life. I lay in my bed, staring into the oppressive darkness, listening to the old house settle around me. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the pipes was magnified, sounding like a footstep, a whisper. Sleep was a distant country I couldn't reach. I was drowning in a sea of questions and fears. How would we pay the mortgage, the utilities, that credit card bill? The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I tossed and turned, the sheets tangling around me like a shroud. Around midnight, I heard it, a sound that cut through the silence. The soft, rhythmic clicking of keys. It was coming from Leo's room. It was a steady, purposeful rhythm, far too focused for a boy who should be deep in sleep, and certainly not the frantic tapping of someone playing a video game. I slipped out of bed, my feet cold on the floor, and pulled on my old chenille Rathbow. I padded down the hallway, the worn carpet soft beneath my slippers, and paused outside his door. A sliver of blue light seeped from underneath the frame. The typing continued, relentless and methodical. I knocked gently. "Leo, sweetheart, it's past midnight." A moment of silence, and then, "Come in, Grandma." I pushed the door open, and the sight that greeted me made my breath cut in my throat. Leo was sitting at his desk, still fully dressed, in the jeans and hoodie he'd worn to school. He was surrounded by a fortress of paper, printing documents, notebooks filled with his neat, blocky handwriting. His laptop screen glowed, illuminating his face with a pale, serious light. The screen was a chaotic mosaic of windows, data streams, and what looked like spreadsheets, a language I couldn't begin to comprehend.
"What on earth are you doing up so late?" I asked, moving into the room. "Research," he said, gesturing to the papers scattered across his desk. "I've been going through Dad's digital footprints for the past 3 hours." Digital footprints? The term sounded so foreign coming from him. I moved closer, my eyes scanning the documents. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat of dread. Bank statements, credit reports, printouts of emails, all of them bearing our family name, Miller. "Leo, where did you get all of this?" My voice was shaky. "Dad isn't very careful with his passwords," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. He clicked something on his laptop, and a new window opened, displaying what was unmistakably Rick's personal email account. "He uses the same one for everything, Linda 2010. He said it without emotion, but the name hit me like a punch to the gut. The year they were married, the year their future seemed so bright. My stomach dropped. "You hacked into your father's email?" "Technically, I just logged in with his password. It's not hacking if he left the digital door wide open." He looked up at me, and the exhaustion in his young eyes was profound. "Grandma, you need to sit down. What I found, it's worse than we thought." My legs suddenly felt like jelly. I sank into the worn desk chair beside him, the one I used to sit in while helping him with his homework. How much worse? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up a printed bank statement and handed it to me. My name was at the top. Helen Miller. My life savings account. I stared at the numbers, my vision blurring. I blinked hard, trying to make them rearrange into something that made sense, but they wouldn't. The final balance, printed in stark black ink at the bottom of the page, was $12.47. "This can't be right," I whispered, the paper trembling in my hands. $12. Decades of careful saving, of squirreling away a little extra from each paycheck, of a lifetime of work as a teacher, all of it reduced to less than the cost of a decent lunch. "It's right." Leo's voice was heavy, carrying a weight no child should ever have to bear. "Dad didn't just take some money when he left. He's been systematically draining our accounts for months, Small transfers at first, then bigger ones. My life savings. The words were a hollow echo. I felt a profound physical coldness spread through my chest. What about your college fund? I asked, a new wave of horror washing over me. We had been so proud of that account, a fund started with a small inheritance from my parents, carefully nurtured over 13 years. Leo didn't have to speak. He simply handed me another statement. The Mason L. Miller Educational Savings Account. The account that should have held over $50,000, the balance showed 0. No. The word came out as a choked sob. No, that money was protected. It was a 529 plan. He can't just take it. Not anymore. He pulled up another document on his screen, a transfer confirmation from 3 weeks ago. He liquidated the entire account and transferred it all to his personal checking. Then he moved it somewhere else. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating in a sea of numbers and betrayal. Somewhere else? Where? That's what took me so long to figure out, Leo said, his fingers flying across the keyboard with a practiced ease that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. He hadn't just stumbled upon this information. He had hunted it down. He explained, his voice low and steady, how he had gotten so good with computers. It wasn't just idle curiosity. He had joined his middle school's Cyber Patriots Club, a national program that teaches students about cybersecurity. Dad thought I was just playing games, Leo explained, not taking his eyes off the screen. He even gave me his old hardware to tinker with. I guess he never imagined I'd use it to do this. He had been learning about network security, about tracking digital trails, about how easily people's lives could be unraveled online if you knew where to look. His father's suspicious behavior over the past few months, the furtive phone calls, the way he'd snap his laptop shut whenever someone entered the room, it had all pushed Leo to start looking. He wasn't a child playing detective. He was a student applying his lessons to a real-world problem, and the problem was his own father. He's been working with someone, Leo said, his voice hardening. Her name is Jessica Thorne. He pulled up a social media profile. A smiling woman with professionally highlighted blonde hair and a dazzlingly white smile stared back at me. Her page was filled with glossy photos of her on vacation, at fancy restaurants, next to luxury cars, all accompanied by inspirational quotes about living your best life and financial freedom. She's his girlfriend. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. More than that, Leo said grimly. She works at Meridian Financial Services downtown. She's been helping him move the money, create new accounts, and, Grandma, this is the worst part. They've been applying for loans, using our information. My heart hammered against my ribs. The phone call from the bank, it wasn't a mistake. It was a warning. But what Leo showed me next was far worse than a single credit card. It was a full-scale financial assault, and we were the targets. Leo clicked to another document and the blood drained from my face. It was a loan application, a $40,000 personal loan approved and disbursed a month ago. It was in my name, using my social security number. The signature at the bottom was a crude but clearly practiced imitation of my own. They forged my signature? I whispered, horrified. They forged everything, Leo said, his jaw tightening with an anger that looked startling on his young face. He clicked again, a stack of credit card applications, American Express, Visa, Discover, all in my name, all recently opened, and all nearly maxed out. Then he showed me another set. These were in his name, listing his age as 25, a blatant falsehood. Identity theft, the words caught in my throat. Your own father? My own son had not just stolen from us, he had stolen us. He had stolen our names, our credit, our identities, all to fund his escape with this smiling predator, Jessica Thorne. How do you know all of this, Leo? How did you find it? I told you I've been watching him for weeks.
The secret phone calls, the way he'd get jumpy when certain emails came in. I started paying attention because something felt wrong. He minimized one window and opened another, a folder on his desktop simply labeled Evidence. Then I learned how to see what he was hiding. Learned how? I was struggling to keep up. The internet that taught Dad how to commit financial fraud taught me how to uncover it, he simply said. Online forums, cybersecurity blogs, the Cyber Patriots training materials. It's not that hard once you understand the basic principles of digital security, or in Dad's case, the complete lack of it. I stared at my grandson, this child I thought I knew so well. While I had been making his favorite spaghetti and reminding him to do his chores, he had been teaching himself the art of cyber forensics. While I was living in a fool's paradise, he had been quietly preparing for war. Leo, this is illegal, what they've done to us.
I know. His voice was unnervingly calm, steady as a rock. That's why I documented everything. Every transfer, every forged document, every fraudulent application. I have proof of all of it. He opened the evidence folder and my breath caught. It was a meticulously organized digital archive of their crimes. Dozens of files, screenshots of bank records, copies of the fraudulent loan agreements, and email conversations. My God, the emails! I read them, my stomach churning with each word. Conversations between Rick and Jessica, laughing about how easy it was, discussing their plans to disappear to a new city, maybe somewhere in Florida, and start over with their money, our money. They were going to change their names. They were going to vanish, leaving me and Leo buried under a mountain of debt they had created. They were discussing apartments in Jacksonville, talking about the new life they would build on the wreckage of ours. They were going to, Leo said, and his expression shifted from anger to something else, something I had never seen on his face before. It was a look of cold, calculated satisfaction. That hit a few snags today. Before I could even ask what he meant, his laptop chimed with an email notification. It was a sound I would come to associate with a strange mix of terror and triumph. Leo glanced at the screen, and a slow, grim smile spread across his face, a smile that sent a shiver down my spine. That, he said, leaning back in his chair, would be Dad's bank calling about the fraud alert I filed this afternoon. My mouth fell open. You filed a fraud alert? I filed several things today, Grandma, he said, turning to face me fully. Fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus, identity theft reports with the FTC, complaints with the Texas State Banking Commission. He ticked them off on his fingers as if listing groceries. And I also sent a very interesting and completely anonymous information packet to the head of compliance at Jessica's employer, Meridian Financial Services. It detailed her unauthorized access to client accounts and her role in a major identity theft scheme. I couldn't speak. I was dizzy. While I had been folding laundry and worrying about dinner, my grandson had been waging a one-boy digital war against the people who had betrayed us. The laptop chimed again. Another email. Leo glanced at the screen and his smile widened. And that, he said with a note of finality, would be confirmation that Miss Jessica Thorne has been suspended indefinitely from Meridian Financial, pending a full internal and external investigation into client account irregularities. Leo, what have you done? The question was a breath, a whisper of awe and fear. He finally closed his laptop, the pale blue light vanishing, leaving us in the soft glow of his desk lamp. He looked at me, his young eyes filled with a wisdom far beyond his years. He said, I protected us. His voice as simple and direct as a law of physics. Dad and Jessica thought they could steal our future and just walk away. They thought we were too old or too young, too trusting, too helpless to fight back. They were wrong. He stood up and began organizing the printed papers into neat, methodical piles. Evidence. And now, Grandma, their house of cards is about to come tumbling down.
The worst part of this whole nightmare was yet to come. The next morning, as the sun rose, we received a visitor, a man in a cheap suit with a clipboard. He wasn't there to help us. He was there to deliver the final blow. He handed me an official-looking envelope. Inside was an eviction notice. Rick and Jessica hadn't just stolen our money. They had taken out a secret, fraudulent loan against our home, the home I had lived in for 40 years. And then they had stopped paying the mortgage. We had 30 days to get out. My knees buckled, and I would have collapsed if Leo hadn't been there to catch me. We were about to be homeless. I remember sinking onto the bottom step of the staircase, the eviction notice clutched in my trembling hand. The paper felt both flimsy and impossibly heavy, the legal jargon swimming before my tear-filled eyes. 30 days. 30 days to vacate the only home I'd known for 4 decades. The home where I raised my son and was now raising my grandson. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. We weren't just broke. We were about to be homeless. It was the lowest moment of my life. I have to ask you all, as I sat there with my world collapsing around me, what would you have done? When you feel that powerless, that utterly betrayed by your own family, where do you even begin to find the strength to fight back? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories, your strength, it helps. It truly does. As I sat there paralyzed by despair, Leo did something extraordinary. He knelt in front of me, took the dreaded paper from my hand, and set it aside. He then took my hands in his. His were small, but his grip was firm, resolute. "Grandma, look at me," he said, his voice cutting through my fog of panic. I looked into his eyes, and the fear I expected to see wasn't there. Instead, there was fire. "This changes nothing," he said. "It just raises the stakes. They want to play dirty? Fine, we can play dirty too." He led me into the kitchen, sat me down at our small breakfast table, and made me a cup of tea, his movements calm and deliberate. Then, he brought his laptop and set it on the table between us. He opened it, and the screen displayed a folder. The name of the folder was Operation Payback. "Yesterday was about stopping the bleeding," he explained, his voice low and intense. "I filed the fraud alerts to freeze their access to our credit. I got Jessica suspended to cut off her professional resources. That was defense. Today," he paused, looking at me to make sure I was listening, "today we go on offense." Inside the folder was a terrifyingly complete archive of their crimes. But there was more. Leo had spent the rest of the night not just documenting their actions against us, but digging deeper into Jessica Thorne. What he found turned my stomach. Using skills he'd learned in his cybersecurity club, he had uncovered a pattern of predatory behavior. Jessica had a history. He found public records from a previous job in Houston where she was accused of embezzling from elderly clients. The case was dropped when she agreed to pay restitution and resign quietly. She had then moved to Austin, lied on her resume, and gotten hired at Meridian Financial Services, who had clearly failed to do a proper background check. "She's a serial predator, Grandma," he said, his voice filled with disgust. And Dad knew, or at least he chose not to know. He showed me more emails, encrypted messages he had managed to decipher. They showed Rick actively helping Jessica identify vulnerable clients at her new firm, people with large retirement accounts and little family oversight. He helped her create fake investment statements to show fake losses, making the thefts look like market downturns. He was her tech wizard, her accomplice. My son hadn't just been seduced by a con artist. He had willingly become one himself. The scale of their depravity was breathtaking. They hadn't just betrayed us, they had waged a war on the elderly and vulnerable of our community.
"So, what's our next move?" I asked, my voice still shaky, but a new feeling was beginning to smolder beneath the fear. Anger. A cold, hard anger. "We fight on 2 fronts," Leo said, pulling up a spreadsheet. "Front 1 is saving our home. Front 2 is making sure Jessica and Dad face consequences for every single person they've hurt. He had already drafted a letter to the bank that held our mortgage, formally disputing the fraudulent secondary loan and the foreclosure, complete with copies of the forged documents as initial evidence. He said it was a long shot, but it would buy us time. Then he showed me his plan for Front 2. He had created 17 separate digital evidence packages, one for each of the victims he had identified. Each package was tailored, containing only the proof relevant to that specific person's case: their own bank records, the illegal transfers, the falsified statements, and the email conversations where Jessica and Rick discussed targeting them. "I'm going to send these out today," he said, anonymously. One package to each victim, one to the Austin Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, and one directly to the Travis County District Attorney. "Leo, you're just a kid," I breathed, overwhelmed. Shouldn't I be the one to go to the police?" He looked at me with that old soul seriousness. "Grandma, if you walk into a police station, you're just one more victim telling a complicated story. They'll take a report, and it will go into a file. But if a detective opens a package filled with this indisputable, pre-organized evidence of a multi-victim interstate fraud ring delivered gift-wrapped to their desk, they'll act, and they'll act fast. This way, the evidence speaks for itself." I realized he was right. My testimony would be emotional, perhaps even dismissed as a bitter mother's rant. His evidence was cold, hard, and undeniable. But as he prepared to send the files, a thought struck me, a cold spike of fear. "Leo, what about us? If you send this, they'll know someone is onto them. What if they come after us?" Leo paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of the 13-year-old boy behind the stoic general. "He's a risk," he admitted quietly. "But, Grandma, what choice do we have? Let them get away with it? Let them make us homeless and destroy all those other families? We can't. This is our only move." And with that, he clicked send. One by one, the evidence packages flew out into the digital ether. Silent missiles aimed at the heart of Rick and Jessica's criminal enterprise. We sat there in the quiet kitchen, the morning sun streaming in, and I felt a dizzying shift in the universe. We had just declared war. Now all we could do was wait for the enemy to fire back. And I couldn't shake the terrifying feeling that we had just made ourselves the biggest targets of all. The hours after Leo sent those emails were the most nerve-wracking of my life. Every car that drove down our quiet street seemed to slow as it passed our house. Every knock at the door, even the mailman's, made me jump. We were exposed, vulnerable. I felt like we were sitting in the middle of a minefield, waiting for the inevitable explosion. To distract myself, I decided to do something proactive. Clinging to the sliver of hope Mr. Henderson had given me, I called the legal aid service he'd recommended. The woman on the phone was kind and patient. I explained our situation, my voice cracking as I recounted the story of the fraudulent loan and the eviction notice. She listened, took down all the details, and promised to have one of their housing lawyers review our case. It wasn't a solution, but it was a step. It was me fighting back in my own way. When I got off the phone, I found Leo not at his computer, but in the living room, looking through an old photo album. It was one I had made for him years ago, filled with pictures of him and his mother, Linda. He was tracing her smile in a photo where she was holding him as a baby. "She would be so proud of you, you know?" I said softly, sitting beside him on the sofa. He looked up, his eyes glassy. "I just wish I could remember her," he whispered. "I wish I could remember her voice." It was a stark reminder that beneath the stoic cyber warrior was a boy who had lost his mother and was now being betrayed by his father. A wave of love and protective fury washed over me. I hugged him tight, and for a few minutes we were just a grandmother and her grandson, finding comfort in each other's arms. The quiet moment was shattered by the sharp ring of my cell phone. We both froze. I looked at the caller ID. It was an unknown number. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was it them? Was it a threat? With a trembling hand, I answered, putting the phone on speaker. Hello? A man's voice, brusque and official, came through. Am I speaking with Helen Miller? Yes, I said, my voice barely audible. Ma'am, this is Detective Miles from the Austin Police Department Financial Crimes Unit. I'm calling because we have received some very compelling information regarding a potential fraud scheme. Your name and your son's, Richard Miller, appear in these documents. We need to ask you some questions. Are you in a safe location to talk? Leo's eyes met mine across the room. They were wide, but steady. It was happening. The first domino had fallen. I spent the next hour on the phone with Detective Miles, recounting the story from the beginning. I told him about Rick leaving, the drained bank accounts, the fraudulent loans, the forged signatures. I didn't mention Leo's involvement. As far as the police were concerned, I was just a victim who had recently discovered the extent of the fraud. Detective Miles listened intently, occasionally interrupting with a sharp question. And you have no idea who might have sent us this evidence packet? No, Detective. I lied, my heart pounding. I can only imagine it might be another victim, or perhaps someone from the company where that woman, Jessica Torn, worked. We're looking into that, he said grimly. Frankly, ma'am, the evidence we received is extensive. It's one of the most well-organized civilian-provided files I've ever seen. Whoever put this together knew what they were doing. A jolt of pride, fierce and hot, shot through me. I glanced at Leo, who was now back on his laptop monitoring something I couldn't see. What happens now? I asked. We're launching a full investigation. We'll be in touch with Meridian Financial. We're tracking the money. But ma'am, I need you to be careful. These people, your son and Jessica, are now officially persons of interest in a major felony investigation. If they contact you, do not engage. Call me immediately. Do you understand? Yes, I understand. When I hung up, the house was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. It was the quiet hum of a machine that had been set in motion. The gears of justice were beginning to turn, slowly but surely. I felt a dizzying mix of relief and terror. We had the police on our side, but Detective Miles's warning echoed in my ears. Rick and Jessica were now cornered animals, and cornered animals are the most dangerous.
That evening, I decided to take another step. I walked next door and knocked on Mr. Henderson's door. He opened it with a warm smile. I told him about the call from the police. He listened, nodding thoughtfully. "This is good, Helen," he said, his voice a comforting rumble. "This strengthens your case against the foreclosure immensely. But the detective is right. You need to be careful." He then gave me a piece of advice that would prove to be invaluable. Get a security camera, a simple one, pointed at your front door, and document everything. Every phone call, every email, every strange car, everything. I thanked him, a deep sense of gratitude welling up inside me. In a world that had suddenly turned hostile, the kindness of a neighbor was a lifeline. I went online that night and ordered the best security camera I could afford. 2 days passed in a tense quiet, the calm before the storm. The legal aid lawyer called back to confirm they were formally challenging the foreclosure. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. The security camera arrived, and Leo, of course, had it installed and connected to our phones within 30 minutes. Then, on the third day, it happened. My phone rang. The caller ID made my blood run cold. It was Rick. I looked at Leo. He gave me a sharp, single nod. My hands shaking, I answered the call and put it on speaker. The voice that came through was not the cold, arrogant voice of the man who had walked out on us. It was the voice of a man in pure, unadulterated panic, and his first words told me that our quiet digital war had just hit its target with devastating force. Mom, you there?" Rick's voice was a frantic, high-pitched squawk, stripped of all its earlier arrogance. The sound was so different, so desperate, it was momentarily disorienting. "I'm here, Rick," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. Leo stood beside me, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on the phone as if he could see through it. "Something's wrong, Mom. Something is terribly wrong," he stammered, words tumbling over each other in a rush. "Someone's targeting me and Jessica. It's like someone is trying to destroy us." I felt a chill of icy satisfaction, but I kept my voice neutral. "Targeting you? What are you talking about?" "My bank accounts are frozen, every single one. The credit cards are all declined. We tried to check into a hotel last night and we were humiliated. We had to pay with the last of our cash. And the police? Mom, the police showed up at Jessica's apartment this morning. They asked her a million questions about identity theft, about her clients at Meridian." Leo silently fist-pumped the air, a small, triumphant gesture that no one but me could see. "And her job," Rick continued, his voice cracking. "They fired her, effective immediately. They said she was being investigated by the State Banking Commission. Mom, someone knows everything. They have records of things that should be private, emails, bank transfers. They even knew about the loans." "Maybe your private things weren't as private as you thought, Rick," I said, the words coming easily. "This isn't a joke," he shrieked, and I could hear the raw panic fraying the edges of his voice. "Whoever's doing this, they have serious computer skills. They sent a complete file to her boss, documenting every move she's made for the past 6 months, every illegal transaction. It's a coordinated attack." He paused, his breathing ragged. Then his voice dropped, laced with a new, paranoid fear. "Mom, I think they might come after you and Leo next. You need to be careful. You need to lock your doors." The irony was so thick it was almost laughable. Here he was, the man who had thrown us to the wolves, now warning me to protect myself from the very consequences his own son had unleashed upon him. He was so consumed by his own guilt and paranoia that he was imagining some shadowy, all-powerful enemy, a phantom hacker, hunting him down. He never once suspected the truth. He never once considered that the architect of his downfall was the quiet, studious 13-year-old boy he had deemed insignificant. "Where are you staying?" I asked, my voice cold. "Some cheap motel outside of town, the Sunset Motel on the highway. We had to use cash." "Mom," his voice shifted, becoming pleading, wheedling. It was the same tone he used as a child when he wanted something he knew he didn't deserve. "Mom, I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you and Leo, but I never meant it to go this far." "How far did you mean for it to go, Rick? When you emptied my life savings? When you stole Leo's college fund? When you tried to make us homeless?" "No, it wasn't like that," he insisted, his voice desperate. "It was just temporary. Jessica, she had this amazing investment opportunity, a crypto thing. It was a sure bet, guaranteed to triple our money in 6 months. We were going to pay everything back, with interest. Nobody was supposed to get hurt." The same tired, pathetic lie every thief and gambler tells themselves. It was just borrowing. It was a sure thing. I felt a wave of nausea. He hadn't just stolen from us, he had gambled our entire future on a get-rich-quick scheme from his con artist girlfriend. "You used our names to get fraudulent loans, Rick. You forged our signatures. That's not borrowing, that's a felony." I know, okay? But Mom, listen to me," he pleaded. "Whoever's doing this to us, they're not just exposing what we did, they're actively sabotaging us. Our car, it got repossessed this morning. The apartment we were going to rent in Jacksonville, the landlord just called and said our application was denied. He said he received an anonymous tip about our financial instability." Jacksonville, so that was their destination. Leo made a note on a pad of paper on the counter. "Maybe you should turn yourselves in," I said flatly. "Turn ourselves in for what?" His voice turned angry, defensive. "For borrowing money from my own family? What we did might be morally questionable, but most of it isn't technically illegal." The sheer audacity of that statement left me breathless, and it was the opening I needed. What about the 17 elderly people your girlfriend stole from, Rick? The ones you helped her target? Is that also just morally questionable? The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It stretched for 5 seconds, then 10. It was a silence so profound, it was like an admission of guilt, a black hole of culpability. How? He finally choked out, his voice a strangled whisper. And that was the question that sealed his fate. That was the moment he admitted everything. Because an innocent man would have said, "What are you talking about?" A guilty man asks, "How did you know?" I glanced at Leo. He held up a note he had scribbled. "He's trapped. Don't tell him how we know. Let him wonder." The same way someone else knows about it, Rick. The same way the police know about it. The same way Jessica's former employer knows about it. The truth has a way of coming out. I could almost hear the gears turning in his panicked mind, the paranoia taking over completely. "Someone's been feeding you information," he accused, his voice turning suspicious. "Mom, who have you been talking to? Did you hire a private investigator?" "I don't need to hire anyone, Rick," I said, a bitter smile touching my lips. "You and Jessica were sloppy. You left digital fingerprints everywhere." "Digital fingerprints?" he scoffed, a hint of his old arrogance returning. "Mom, you barely know how to check your email. How would you know anything about digital fingerprints?" Just then, Leo, who had moved to the living room window, peered through the curtains. He looked back at me and held up his phone. He had typed a single, chilling message on the screen. It was a screenshot of a breaking news alert from a local Austin news station. My heart began to race. It was time to spring the final part of the trap.
Leo closed his laptop with a soft click and sat down across from me at the small kitchen table. The morning sun streamed through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air, creating an illusion of peace that felt utterly at odds with the violence of the last hour. He just sat there, patient, letting me breathe, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. Is it over? I finally managed to ask, my voice a hoarse whisper. The arrests are over, Leo said, his own voice quiet, but carrying that same unnerving certainty I had come to rely on. The recovery process is just beginning. He looked at me, his brown eyes, so much like his mother's, filled with a gravity that no 13-year-old should possess. But yes, Grandma, the part where we were the victims, that part is over. Now, he said, a small, determined smile touching his lips for the first time that morning, now we get to be the survivors. Survivors. The word echoed in my mind. It felt right. We had been through a firestorm, a hurricane of betrayal and deceit, and we were still standing, battered, bruised, but not broken. I looked at my grandson, truly looked at him, as if for the first time. This child, this boy, who should have been spending his afternoons playing video games and worrying about algebra tests, had systematically and brilliantly dismantled two adult criminals. He had done it with nothing but his intelligence, his courage, and a fierce protective love for his family. He had been our shield, our sword, and our strategist. The full weight of what he had accomplished settled over me. Rick had spent the last few days of his freedom looking over his shoulder, terrified of some phantom enemy, some shadowy hacker he had imagined in his paranoid mind. He never once suspected that the force hunting him, anticipating his every move and methodically sealing off his every escape route, was his own son. The boy he had abandoned without a second thought, the child he had dismissed as just part of the scenery in his life, had become the architect of his downfall. And Leo hadn't just protected us. He had delivered a chance at justice to 17 other families, families who might never have known what truly happened to their life savings, families who might have gone to their graves believing they had simply made poor investments. He had given them a voice, he had given them a fighting chance, and he had done it all while keeping up with his homework. The rest of that day was a blur. Detective Miles called back in the afternoon. He was professional, but I could hear a note of respect, almost awe, in his voice. He confirmed that Richard Miller was in custody and that he was already cooperating, hoping for a plea deal. Jessica Thorne, he said, was not being as helpful. The evidence against them was, in his words, an airtight slam dunk, thanks in large part to the anonymous evidence packet they had received. He asked again if I had any idea who the source could be. I stuck to my story, saying I could only assume it was another of their victims. I would protect my grandson's secret until my dying day. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. The nice lawyer from the Legal Aid Service, armed with the police report and the evidence of the fraudulent loan, successfully halted the foreclosure proceedings on our home. It was a temporary reprieve, but it felt like a miracle. It meant we wouldn't be thrown out onto the street. We had to give statements. I sat with prosecutors recounting the painful story over and over. Leo was interviewed as well, but by a special victims advocate, in a way that was sensitive to his age. He told them the truth, that his dad had left, and that he had used his computer skills to find out what had happened to their money because he was worried about his grandmother. He presented himself as a concerned, tech-savvy kid, not as the digital mastermind he truly was. They bought it completely, praising him for his quick thinking and his loyalty. Through it all, Leo was my rock.
He helped me sort through the mountain of fraudulent bills that started arriving. He spent hours on the phone with credit card companies disputing the charges, and he created a detailed budget for us to live on with my small pension. He was shouldering a burden that would have crushed most adults, and he did it with a quiet, unwavering grace. One evening, about a month after the arrests, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a letter. It was from his school. "What's that, honey?" I asked. He looked up, a proud, shy smile on his face. "I got accepted," he said. "The National Cyber Patriots competition. The school team is going to the state finals in Dallas." Tears welled in my eyes, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of joy. The skills he had been forced to use for such a dark purpose were now being recognized, celebrated. It was a sign, I thought, that good could truly come from bad, that light could find its way through even the deepest darkness. As he told me all about the competition, his face animated with a genuine, boyish excitement, I finally understood what had really happened. My son, Rick, thought abandoning us would break us. He thought that by taking our money, he was taking our power, but he was wrong. Instead of breaking us, he had revealed a strength we never knew we had. And in his son, in my grandson Leo, he hadn't just created a victim, he had forged a hero. The world had tried to knock him down, but my boy had simply learned how to fly. The 8 months that followed were a testament to the slow, arduous process of rebuilding a life from ruins. It wasn't a movie montage with triumphant music. It was a day-by-day, bill-by-bill effort to climb out of the hole Rick and Jessica had dug for us. The legal battles were draining. The prosecutors, armed with Leo's meticulously gathered evidence, built an ironclad case. The story became a minor local sensation, a cautionary tale about financial fraud and family betrayal that was featured on the evening news. The hardest decision we had to make was about the house. The legal aid lawyer had done a brilliant job of fighting off the foreclosure, but the truth was, we couldn't afford to keep it on my pension alone. The house, with its grand staircase and sprawling garden, was filled with memories, but many of them were now tainted. Selling it felt like another loss, another piece of our lives being stripped away. But it was also a strategic retreat. By selling it, we were able to pay off the legitimate mortgage, clear some of the smaller debts Rick had left behind, and, miraculously, walk away with a small nest egg of equity. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a foundation. We moved into a small, 2-bedroom rented house across town. It was modest, but it was clean, bright, and most importantly, it was ours. It felt less like a museum of a broken past and more like a blank canvas for a new future. I went back to substitute teaching a few days a week, not just for the money, but because I missed the energy of the students, the sense of purpose. It felt good to be Mrs. Miller, the teacher, again, not just Helen Miller, the victim.
One afternoon in June, Leo burst through the front door, waving an official-looking envelope, his face alight with more pure, unadulterated joy than I had seen from him in almost a year. "Grandma, check this out. It's from the DA's office," he exclaimed, dropping his backpack on the floor. I took the letter, my heart racing as I saw the state seal at the top. I read the first line aloud. Restitution payment in the amount of $24,800. I stared at the number, hardly believing it was real. "That's from the sale of Jessica's assets," Leo explained, practically bouncing on his feet. The state had seized and liquidated everything she had bought with stolen money, her luxury car, her designer jewelry, her investment accounts. "We're getting back almost half of what Dad took from our savings, and Mrs. Garcia down the street got her full amount back. They caught it before Jessica could move all of her money. 16 families are getting something back, Grandma. Not everything, but something." $24,000? It felt like $1 million. It was enough to replenish a significant portion of Leo's college fund. It was enough to breathe again. "And your father?" I asked, my voice soft. Leo's expression grew more serious. "He's served 7 years in federal prison," he said quietly. "He pled guilty to avoid a longer sentence. Jessica got 15 years. She refused to cooperate." He paused, looking out the window. "His lawyer says he might get out in 5 with good behavior." 5 years. Part of me felt a strange, hollow relief that it wasn't longer. Another fiercer part of me wondered if it was long enough. "How do you feel about that?" I asked, studying his face. He considered the question with his usual thoughtfulness. He finally said, "I feel like justice happened. Not revenge, just consequences. He made his choices, now he has to live with them." He turned back to me, his eyes bright again. "But Grandma, I want to show you something else, something I've been working on." He pulled his laptop from his backpack and opened it on the kitchen table. The screen displayed a clean, professional-looking website. The header read, "Cyber Guardians, protecting our seniors from digital threats." "Leo, what is this?" "Remember how I said I wanted to help other people?" he said, his voice filled with passion. "Well, after the story was on the news, my Cyber Patriots coach and I started getting calls from people, seniors who were worried, families who suspected a relative was being scammed. So we started a project." He clicked through different pages showing free services, educational resources, and video tutorials he made himself. "It's a nonprofit school project. We hold free workshops at community centers and libraries. We teach seniors how to spot phishing scams, how to create strong passwords, how to check their bank statements for fraud. We even built a little helpline people can call if they think they're being targeted." The website had a section for testimonials. I read them, my eyes filling with tears. Leo and the Cyber Guardians helped my mother realize her online friend was a romance scammer before she sent her life savings. Thanks to their workshop, I found fraudulent charges on my credit card and was able to stop them. These amazing kids are a gift to our community. At the bottom of the page, it listed the project lead, Leo Miller, my grandson, my 13-year-old, almost 14-year-old grandson who had taken the ugliest experience of our lives and transformed it into a shield to protect others. A soft chime came from his laptop, a notification for a video call. He glanced at it, his expression shifting into a focused professional mode. He said, "I need to take this, Grandma." He already stood up. "It's our weekly call with the team, planning the next workshop. We're working on a new module about social media privacy." He started to head to his room, but I caught his hand. "Leo, wait." He stopped. "Are you happy? I mean, really happy?" He paused, looking at me with those serious brown eyes that held so much of his mother. He said, "I'm proud, Grandma. I'm proud of what we survived. I'm proud of what I can do to help people. I'm proud of how strong we've become." He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. Dad thought abandoning us would break us. Instead, it showed us what we really are made of. He went to his room to take his call, and I sat there in our quiet, sunny kitchen, thinking about how much had changed. My son had tried to erase our future. Instead, he had created a hero. He had set a fire meant to destroy us. But from those ashes, my grandson had risen, stronger and brighter than ever before. Life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. Our small house felt more like a home than the grand Victorian ever had. It was filled not with the ghosts of the past, but with the sounds of our new beginning, the clatter of my mixing bowls as I rediscovered my love for baking, the excited chatter of Leo and his friends as they worked on their Cyber Guardians project in our living room, the comforting murmur of the television as we watched old movies together in the evenings. Leo thrived. He had grown 3 inches and developed the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who had faced down real-world dragons and won. He still got straight A's, still helped with the dishes, still kissed my cheek goodnight.
But he also ran a nonprofit that protected families, consulted with local community leaders on cyber safety, and even was asked to speak to the new recruits at the Austin Police Academy about the youth perspective on cybercrime. My 14-year-old grandson had become someone I looked up to. He was my hero. One Tuesday afternoon, about a year after Rick had left, I was grading papers at the kitchen table when my phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID, and my entire body went rigid. Inmate call, Texas Department of Corrections. Rick. I stared at the ringing phone, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. A flood of images washed over me, Rick's cold eyes as he left us, the shattered picture frame on the floor, the terror in his voice when his world came crashing down. The phone kept ringing, a shrill, insistent demand for my attention, for my forgiveness, for a connection he himself had severed. I thought about the man he had become, the stranger who had willingly participated in the financial ruin of vulnerable people. I thought about the peace we had fought so hard to find, the new life we had so carefully built from the ashes of his betrayal. I thought about Leo, in his room down the hall, probably coding a new tool for his website, his talents now used for good, for creation, not for destruction. The phone rang a fifth time, a sixth, then it went to voicemail. My hand trembled as I reached for it. For a moment, I was tempted to listen. What would he say? Would he be sorry? Would he make excuses? Would he demand something? 2 minutes later, it rang again. Inmate call, Texas Department of Corrections. He was persistent, but so was I. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the green answer button, and then, with a sense of clarity and finality that was as absolute as the closing of a vault door, I pressed the red button, declining the call. Then, I went into my settings, and with steady fingers, I blocked the number.
Some bridges, once burned, should not be rebuilt. Some wounds, once inflicted, are too deep to ever fully heal. Some forgiveness has to be earned over a lifetime, not demanded in a 2-minute phone call from prison. And some consequences need to last exactly as long as they should. Upstairs, I could hear the faint, enthusiastic sound of Leo's voice. He was on a video call, talking to his team. I could hear words like firewall and two-factor authentication and phishing link. He was laughing about something. It was the sound of a happy, productive, and brilliant young man building his future. My grandson had learned the hardest lesson of all at such a young age, that when someone hurts your family, you don't just survive, you become stronger. You use that pain to make sure they can never hurt anyone's family again. You take the bricks they threw at you, and you build a fortress, not just for yourself, but for everyone else who needs shelter. I smiled, a real, genuine smile, and went back to my papers, listening to the sound of justice, healing, and hope being forged in the room down the hall, one line of code at a time. And so, that's my story. It's a story of deep betrayal, but also of incredible resilience. It's been a painful journey to share, but I believe in the power of stories to help us heal. I have to ask you all, looking back, did I do the right thing by blocking his call? Was it strength, or was it a lack of forgiveness? I would be so grateful to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories of survival and strength. And if you or someone you know has ever faced a devastating betrayal from someone you trusted, please know you are not alone. Your story matters, and your strength is greater than you know. Thank you for listening.